Hello, and welcome to IAB Pulse, our new video news show on which we'll be discussing the hottest and most important topics in the industry today. I'm Chris Brutally, your host and IAB's Vice President of Industry Insights and Content Strategy. Today, we'll be talking about three very important topics: generative AI, signal loss, and content consumption. With me today are two leaders in our industry on these topics: John Roberts, Dotdash Meredith's Chief Innovation Officer, and Angelina Ng, IAB's Vice President of the Measurement, Addressability, and Data Center. Folks, thank you for being here and welcome to the virtual stage.
Thank you for having us. Good to be here.
Great to be here too, and love to see you, John Roberts. Nice to have you.
Thank you, John, for being here. And you know what? I want to start with you. We had some fascinating conversations leading up to this recording, and I want to jump right into something that you had mentioned earlier. And, Dotdash Meredith has built a massive business built on, among other things, understanding people's search and reading habits at a very structured and granular level. But within the context of generative AI, you talked about the fact that we're entering into a whole new world for information discovery on the internet, and that the quote unquote unit of work is now facts and points. So can you explain that and elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we are a large publisher, right? We built America's largest publisher. We have about 1.5 million articles, about 30 million people a day come through our doors to read that content every day, which is a lot of work getting to here. But that means we're also a large language business, right? When you're dealing with that many articles and something like 1 billion words of content, that can be quite hard for people to find their way through, right? Publishers historically, up until like right now through history, have written lots of content and let the reader figure out how to find their way through it. We invented indexes, that made it easier to find. Google did that for the internet, that made it easier to find, but that was like the innovation, right? It was put an index on your content and then let people figure out where they might find that information from. What we're now able to do with these tools is actually break apart that content and rebuild it in a way that can actually go from like best answer for anyone, right, which is what publishers have had to write, to actually parse through that information to get to the best answer for you. And that's never really been possible before, certainly not at a publisher level. But these tools are making that at least imaginable, right? I'm not going to undersell the complexity or the difficulty of bringing something like that into the world. The challenges of these LLMs are well understood and things we're working on, lots of people are working on. But I absolutely believe that there's a world now where you can expect to go to a publisher and be able to parse through that information much more easily, be able to find facts and information that may be buried deep in 1,000 words of text you might find it hard to find, and get that information to you when you need it, and then give you much richer routes through these huge libraries of high quality content than is currently possible right now. And that's an exciting future, because that's not something publishers have ever been able to do.
One thing that you mentioned that also struck me is the fact that regarding AI, and specifically generative AI, your prediction is that user behavior will change slower than expected and in unpredictable ways. And why I found that so interesting is because from the industry perspective, it seems like things are moving at 90 miles an hour since Q4 last year, when when OpenAI and Microsoft generative AI tool launched. So to hear user behavior will change slower than expected and in unpredictable ways, what do you mean by that?
I think the headlines are always going to say like everybody's totally changed, everything's using GPT for everything, the old world is dead, right? Those are the best headlines to write that get everyone to read it. Users still like searching. Searching is a really effective way to get information that you need and what you're looking for. I would say it's going to happen slower than we expect, but it's still going to happen really quickly. We're talking, I would say that it's probably like over quarters, not many years. But it's not all going to be totally different tomorrow. I think we're going to find exactly what these kinds of use cases are that fit the types of questions that are right to ask this way, right? It's not everything is going to be solved by ChatGPT or AI or large language models. And it takes time for users to learn, or even time for users to expect good results in these kinds of ways. But we're definitely in an AI world now, and we are going to be discovering together what that means and what people expect. And predicting anything at this moment in time is a terrible idea. We can make predictions now, and 3 months from now, we'll look back and say, hey, that was naive.
Yeah.
But we also aren't interested in waiting and seeing. We're interested in being one of the teams, one of the companies right in the middle of it, figuring out with the knowledge that we're going to try things that aren't going to work, that we're going to look back and say, oh, that was daft.
Yeah.
But we're only going to get to the versions that are good by working through questions and challenges of how to put these new experiences up in ways that people can tell us whether they're good or not. Right? We're going to put it in front of users and see.
I'd like to add, right? So as an active user of ChatGPT and Bard, that it's really difficult as a user. So I'm talking about it as a user, really difficult to distinguish if whatever I'm querying, if what's coming back to me is completely accurate and who had authored it. And so is there any validity to what is being returned? And especially unless you're paying for the premium version, the models are still, or the data behind it is still delayed, right? Behind a little bit. So, and I think companies like Dotdash Meredith, where you know that there are experts that are writing this and have done their due diligence and research, users want to trust the outputs that are coming from generative AI. And I think that the way that you guys are approaching it, especially around ensuring that your organization and your writers and your authors get the credit for it, and I think there's something to that. I think more and more users are going to realize, hey, just because I use ChatGPT doesn't necessarily mean I'm getting the best quality back. And so they do want to go to the sources that they've trusted over the years, and make sure that they're getting the right information.
So John, Angie, thank you for that. And that really leads me into my next question. I'm going to ask this question of John, and then Ange, I would like you to comment on it as well. I have a particular answer to coming up in regards to this. John, what do you think the larger opportunity is for a premium publisher such as Dotdash Meredith regarding generative AI in terms of delivering, higher quality service, better user experience for their visitors? A la what Angie was saying, was talking about, who this results came from, right? What were the sources of the results of the prompt? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I think the quickest route is going to be a lot of AI power tools inside to help people with productivity. Like everyone is already charging down that route, right? It's kind of the simpler use case, and I think everyone is already starting to experiment with how that can make their own jobs more efficient internally. But as we're talking about user-facing use cases, which is where I think a lot of the discussion is going to be, because they're harder for the reasons you mentioned, right? These systems hallucinate, or I'd say pathologically make things up, right?
Yeah.
They're built in a probabilistic model, right? So they're really talking about what is the most likely word to come next, rather than what is the most accurate fact. So that's a feature, not a bug, right? That's a fundamental piece of how these things are built. We have a bit of an interesting advantage, we think, in this world, because if you're dealing with these in a general case, you're looking at all the information ever written on the internet, and you're pulling that information into these systems and building a large language model off the back of that. You're going to hear a lot about people talking about trying to ground these systems, right? So they can be very plausible, but is it grounded in fact? Now we have an advantage here because we're figuring out ways in which we can ground output from LLMs in our corpus of content. And we wrote all that content, we fact checked all that content. If it's in the health space, it's medically reviewed by an MD or a PharmD. If it's in the finance space, a financial professional has reviewed that for accuracy. And we also now have like really early experiments which show that we can keep the outputs of these systems to directly quote the content, that they can cite the person who wrote it, that we can talk about when that content was last written or updated and who reviewed it. So we can actually do all of those things which you expect on the internet, which is, if I'm going to trust this information, you better tell me why I should trust it. And for a large language model, that's impossible because you have no idea where this came from. But if you couple these capabilities with that fully authoritative, expert written, cited bylined answers, you've got something really interesting, right? Do users want that? For some questions, yes. For some questions, no. The other thing which is really interesting here is if you're just asking on ChatGPT, you're going to get the average answer, right? Definitionally, they're giving you an average answer. They're not giving you a good answer, the best answer, or even attempting to give you the best answer for you. They're giving you an average, definitionally mediocre answer. We know that if you're asking a question on Serious Eats, you're looking for a very different type of answer than if you're on Simply Recipes or Southern Living. And we can take that context into account. We have the advantage because we know a lot more about the type of person reading this when you're on that site or in that moment than you do if you're just like rocking up to ChatGPT or Bard with no context or background. So even from the starting point, we can give you something much more differentiated and specific to your interests based on where you're coming in or the content you're on right now. So we actually get a lot more to start with to give you something much more custom and specific.
Got it. Angie, now I want to bring it to our industry from an advertising standpoint. You know, as head of IAB's measurement, addressability, and data center, I'd love to get your 10,000-foot view regarding the state of using generative AI to deliver targeted advertising to achieving advertising goals and at scale.
So I'm going to put my brand hat on,
Okay.
right? Thinking back to when I was at Morgan Stanley. And the way that companies like Morgan Stanley and many other brands is making sure that they are placing their ads in places where they feel that there is quality audiences and have that have content that aligns with their I wouldn't say beliefs, but their values, and have a certain level of integrity, right? So we've heard a lot about made for advertising sites. We've heard a lot about, long tail sites, and not that all long tail sites are bad, but there is this need for placing ads in suitable environments that align with a brand's value. And I think that when it comes to advertising, that's not going away. Brands want to place their ads in partners that they feel have very valuable content for their consumers and want to place their messages in front of them. And I think that companies like Dotdash Meredith, who have tons of content, they can also provide insights into not only the content, but user behavior and create audience segments off of that. And I don't think that we're at a point where AI can just do that for them, right? So AI can understand what content has been written, but there's no input into consumer or user behavior of what is trending and what is not trending. There would need to be some sort of input into that. So when it comes to advertising and media planning, buying, and trying to understand audience segments, I think this is where there still needs to be a very strong direct relationship between publishers and advertisers, and understanding what are the editorial roadmaps and what kind of content they have and who's actually writing these articles, so that things like seller-defined audiences, publishers can create audiences off of content and behavior and create affinity segments or interest segments or cohorts of some sort and present them back to advertisers. Now, how AI, and maybe not necessarily generative AI, how AI will help is perhaps in the evaluation and assessment of filling out some of the gaps when it comes to some of the data signal loss, on helping with how media is performing if there is not fully that connected of person seeing an ad to outcome, because we might be of those data signals. But I think that there's tons of opportunities to use AI to help benefit, to help improve efficiencies and effectiveness, but it needs to be in collaboration with your publisher partners.
What say you, John?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think anybody who is out there saying, yeah, it's going to solve all the problems and the people aren't going to be involved is probably overemphasizing where this is going to go, right? I think it can be an incredible assistant. It can be very supportive of things we already do. It can make people more efficient. I'd take from a publisher perspective, I think, as I was saying, we can build a better publisher, which means that people can expect more from what they're getting when they come to a publisher. If we help people, and we help people better than we have before, it's going to work for advertising partners too, right? And we've always taken that bet, right? If we are doing a better job for our readers, then we're never the last step in the process, right? You come to us trying to figure out what the best garden furniture is, or how to plant perennials for a better summer garden. We're going to be able to line you up with somebody who's not us to go forth and make that purchase, or get a garden designer to come overhaul your garden. Like, if we are better at helping our users, then we're much, much better to partner with our advertisers. And I think to take that one step further, I will always bet on us knowing our audience better than a third-party system coming in to try to tell us that they understand our audience better. And I think these AI systems, because we mostly understand our audience through the content that they're reading, these systems give us a very fine-grained understanding of our content. It allows us to use that content to understand our users much, much better in a more powerful way. And honestly, I think that's going to allow us to partner with people to build much more relevant advertising messages for that content, right? I think the days of kind of run-of-site ad messaging should be over, right? People say like, oh, nobody clicks on ads, nobody engages with ads. It's like, no, nobody engages with bad ads.
Right.
I think we have the opportunity now to tackle that and really take on like, what is a much better advertising message? If we're talking right person, right message, right time, we can actually really start tackling that right message piece and hone in and provide a level of granularity and insight we've never been able to tackle. And that's an opportunity. It's going to be hard, right? But I think it's really interesting to see where that takes us.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It harkens back to this idea that I think print magazines actually did it really well, right? Like, part of reading a magazine, especially, the highest of quality magazines, so much of it was about the advertisements as well, right? They were very well targeted most of the time. And it was part of the reading experience. And Meredith, before it was Dotdash, Meredith did that incredibly well over the years. Which brings me, and John, you started to allude to this, to the signal loss, right? And I'm going to start with Angie here, because this is something that she and I have been working on over the last 2 years. We've published a couple of papers regarding this. So, and from your perspective, what's the opportunity for AI, not necessarily generative AI, but AI and machine learning and AI that is evolving quickly overall in the wake of the third-party cookieless future, right? Continued privacy legislation and signal loss, and ultimately the decrease in addressable audience inventory. What's the opportunity here with AI and ML regarding addressing where we are now and heading at a greater clip?
So I'd love to piggyback on what John kind of started alluding to, and that's, I think, one area could be really most exciting is around the ad creative. and although there's going to be signal loss, there is going to be contextual signals, seller defined audiences, cohort signals. And if you take all three of those combinations, and if that was, and you're able to collect that through the supply chain, right? So signals coming from the publisher, coming from your ad servers, your DSP, and there still will be enough signals for companies to still what I call not personalized ad, but provide relevant ads. I think that's where it's exciting. You know, we had this promise of dynamic ads in the past. I think, you know, dynamic ads still had, you know, it was kind of in my perspective, a little bit two-dimensional. Now with the use of AI, there is potential to really have different types of creatives served on different types of pages, on different types of sites, based on a combination of information about the user or the cohort, what type of device they're on, what region they're in, and then the content and behavior signals that the publisher is providing. Now, one thing that we need to keep in mind, though, is that you know, AI can only be as good as the data that it uses, and so we're still not at a stage where that we can depend on AI to do that, right? There is bias. So if you currently do your own query of, you know, what is the, you know, show me a picture of an ideal family, you know, 2 parents, 2 kids, and what you get back may not necessarily represent the diversity that we have in our US population. And there's several different examples of that. Now, I think I saw one where show me a picture of a C-level suite of executives, and that too for an ad agency, which was quite interesting, and they all looked kind of the same. So
Right.
I think that there's still a long ways to go on the creative side. When it comes to AI, I think where I'm most excited, and you touched on it, is on the data and measurement perspective, with the loss of data signal, and potentially, and especially with what Apple's doing, and the potential and the likes of Privacy Sandbox and the privacy regulations, we will continue to have signal loss, right? And it'll be aggregate, there will be noise, and we need to make sure that our models can take into consideration perhaps data that's not there. So, and that's where, like, for example, like a lot of people are probably not targeting iOS devices because there are very little iOS signals. So how can we use AI and machine learning to fill in the gaps so that we can still target those audiences without those signals?
So, John, we talked the other day about the acceleration of building ad creative, you know, optimized for attention, mindset, contextual. You said something else that really made me pause, and also put the ball on the plate for the IAB. So I want to get back to Angie. I'm going to come back to you on that in 1 second. But you had mentioned that in this future, building ad creative optimized for attention, mindset, and contextual, that there was a layer of the ad tech systems that needed to catch up. And I think for those in the industry who don't know this, this is a great learning opportunity, I think, coming from you in terms of what do you mean by that?
Everything's changing very fast, right? And well, I know we'll talk about the cookieless future in a minute, but that's obviously coming out rapidly, which is separate, I think, to the AI piece. I don't think AI is needed to solve it. I think we have all the tools already to solve that part of the puzzle. But as these new processes come on board, as we work on new ways of either providing experiences to users or talking about working with our clients and partners with some of these new capabilities of AI, the systems aren't built, the processes don't exist to really handle more fine-grained targeting, more complex creative delivery, even before we get into like new ad formats or pieces going forward. So that's just the statement that we're in in a moment of change, right? And it's not just the technology itself that's changed, it's how we organize around that, how we track it, how we analyze it, measure it, like what we call success. All of those things are going to be brought back in and kind of relitigated as these technologies come through. So, I mean, I see that as an opportunity, right? I think there's some pieces of the entire ecosystem that we all kind of take for granted right now that I actually don't think are working particularly well. And at a moment of change, we get to kind of look at all of it and say, okay, how much of this do we want to take on and change? And I think to follow on from Andy, like, we talk a lot about signal loss and we say the market's not addressable. Everyone's addressable. You can run an ad against anyone. We allowed this conversation to be taken over by cookies a long time ago. And I just think that's fundamentally wrong. Like, that puts us in the wrong place. And I don't think we need new technology to solve that. I think we have all the pieces right now to take it on. And if we think we need to wait for AI, we're overcomplicating the answer.
And what's the IAB opportunity with this?
Wow. So there's been a lot of conversations, as you know, internally about what the role of IAB is. I think one of the things, and we're still kind of talking through it because AI in general is such a huge topic, and it can be in itself overtaking everything that we talk about. But I think in context of AI, we really need to focus on how AI, what are the opportunities in using AI, and then what are the things that we need to do to ensure that we still have a thriving economy, right? It was interesting in the Video Leadership Summit that we just came back from in Asbury Park. Rashad Tabakawala said one thing that I thought that was, he said a lot of great things. So,
He said a lot of things.
a lot of great things. But one thing that really stood out to me was that he said that, AI is not going to take over jobs, right? He said that people who know AI are going to take over jobs of people who don't know AI. Or I'm paraphrasing, but you kind of get the gist. And I think it's really important that we provide guardrails around how AI should be used, making sure that companies are ethically and responsibly collecting the right types of data and using it for the right purposes, and making sure that there are best practices and guidelines of how to minimize bias. The second is identify where there's opportunities to be effective and efficient, right? So that agencies and brands and publishers can actually do the job that they really want to do with the use of AI without having to be concerned about, a financial burden or having to leverage too many tools. So kind of giving them some guidance around that. But third is one thing that we've been talking a lot about is how can we protect IP for both publishers and advertisers? So are there things that we can come up with that will give permission to different AI bots and tools that the publishers and advertisers are okay with, that they've approved, that they have relationships and partnerships with, versus allowing kind of an open web kind of free for all, and et cetera. So I think there's many more other opportunities. We talk about sustainability and stuff like that, and it'll be interesting to see, the balance between sustainability and AI. Can those two actually, be in the same sentence or not? And some people say yes, some people say no.
Yeah, John characterized it, I think, the other day to the 3 Bs. What are the blockers? What are the bottlenecks? And what are the benchmarks required to navigate through this? So, John, you just became a quasi de facto consultant for the IAB by making that statement. John, any comment to what Angie said? I want to get to Dotdash Meredith's new offering, which is very cool. But did you want to comment first on what Angie just said?
I think we're seeing the same things, right? It's so early and there's so much changing, and we're starting to see the outlines of where the big conversations are going to have to be. But we're all going to figure this out by doing it, right?
Yeah.
And we're all going to have to charge through this, keep an eye out for things that are challenging, and solve them as they come up. I think we're going to find great solutions. We think we're going to have a lot of good ideas. There's going to be a million ad tech companies that decide to slap AI on the end of their name and have a yacht in Cannes next summer. And I think that's going to be a means of trying to sell an old product with a new name in many cases. And we can hopefully avoid too much of that and get to things that are real. Because I think the real capabilities of these AI tools integrated with all these other systems we already have, I think there's going to be some real transformative change, but it's going to take a few passes before we start to see what that's going to be.
Tell us about the new tool that Dotdash Meredith released. I believe it's called Decipher.
Yes, it is. So it's actually very simple. It's saying that if you come to a page reading about homework help, then you're probably a parent of kids. If you're reading about family dinners, you're probably a parent of kids. If you're thinking about family vacations right now or road trips, you're probably a parent of kids. If you're looking at infant health on Health Magazine, you're probably a parent of kids. So I'd say that if you're on any of those pages across health, travel and leisure, all recipes, Addressability, right, we know exactly who the parents are and also when they are being a parent. Historically, if you said, oh, let me go find all the parents across Dotdash Meredith, we have 30 million people a day coming through the business. Classically, you'd say, oh, let's go find some third-party cookie data set or an identity pool or all of that, and let's go reach all those people across the network. And depending on the fidelity of that data set, you would get some people right, you would get some people wrong, you would stereotype people, you would demographically target people, you would offensively get that wrong in some places and creepily get it right in others. You would reach people who might be parents, but they're on liquor.com reading about a Manhattan recipe right now and don't really want to be reached with parent-based advertising. And that was when it worked. And now that iOS took away 50% of that targeting, it doesn't work anymore. And it's getting more and more constrained. And obviously with the Chrome cookies going away next year, this is going to become almost infinitesimally small. And we just never needed to do it that way, because we can reach you when you're not just a parent, but when you're being a parent. And when you're in that mindset, it's 100% accurate. It's never creepy because you're seeing the messaging at the point when it's relevant to you. And there is no iOS problem. So it's kind of shockingly simple, right? But it's shockingly simple unless you have over 40 brands, 1.5 million pieces of content, and you're trying to build audience profiles across the entire network based on that content. So we basically took something we'd actually historically done at Dotdash, which was this kind of artisanal, like farm to table individual targeting of a account strategist who really knew their site and really knew their vertical and matching up those intents on a case by case one-off basis, and turned that into something that was a product that the whole business could use. And it meant that we weren't just lining up an advertiser in a vertical to the site that was about that vertical, but that we could take somebody who really wants to reach White Lotus fans, but then find every single other place across all of Dotdash Meredith that those fans are turning up. So we can answer the question of, are they actually luxury travel intenders or not, right? You can take this for an auto company trying to understand how to reach a country music audience, because that's the celebrity talent they have in their ad creative. And we can reach that across the entire business, from install to TNL, right, to all these different places. So it gives us a front row seat into what the entire world cares about, because we, like last year, we had about 11 billion visits, right? We've got a huge consumer data set to learn from.
Wow.
And by having that deep understanding of what people are looking for, it means that we can group and package up that intent across any number of audiences. And so it's never run of site or run of content or run of network. It's just run of the audience mindset, right? And that allows us to bring that whole scale to bear.
Wow.
Can I ask a question? So
Yeah,
it would be so easy for people to say that Decipher is really a the next level of contextual targeting, and then there's there is this perception that hey, contextual targeting, obviously very, very effective, but not scalable. Would you categorize Decipher as in a contextual targeting solution, or is there a better label for it? Or
this is the perfect question, right? It's the one that comes up a lot.
We did not plan this question. So
no, you're good. This is
Good job, Ann.
No, this is not the first time we've been asked this question.
Well, first time by us. So
yeah. So what it says, contextual targeting got a bad name for two reasons. Firstly, old contextual targeting solutions didn't scale, right?
Yeah.
And the other piece is contextual targeting, as it has classically been done, is, oh, this page mentions this thing, so run an ad for this thing on this page.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, okay, well, there's only so many pages that talk specifically about this product. Right. And also, if you do this and you're doing contextual targeting on a news site, you run cruise ads on cruise disaster content. Like, that's really bad. Right. So these things are problematic. In our world, it was a great example I came across. It's saying, okay, there's an article about what perennials to plant in your spring garden. We have Better Homes and Gardens, right? We're an authority on all of this at the Spruce. Contextual targeting would sell you bags of seeds. Intent targeting will sell you garden furniture because your intent is to have a lovely garden, right? And that intent is broad-based across the whole business, right? The parenting one's another perfect example, right? Contextual targeting for a parent, like for a parent product like diapers or kids' meals or lunchboxes or any of these things, would run those ads just on those places. What I'm saying is, I can use the content to understand who you are and what you need, which is why it's about the intent of the user, not about the contextual matching of a product to the page, right? We're taking the route from the content to the user and then to what they're looking for, right? And by going via the user and getting a cookieless understanding of the user, right? That means we're actually able to take a much deeper, much broader view. And it's something which people are already doing, right? When you're talking about cookie targeting at the moment, those are all lined up, as you said, right, to seller-defined audiences to individual audience profiles. We generally aren't saying, oh, run against this particular piece of content because you want this piece of content. We're talking to advertisers who are trying to reach an intender, a personality, a mindset, a generation with a passion. And we can take that and say, oh, this is exactly where that audience with these passion points are turning up. So our first step is always, here's an insight about your audience you might not have known before. And now here's how we're going to reach them across this whole network of sites. And I think if you've got a small site, it doesn't scale, but when you're the biggest publisher in America, you got the scale. That was the other half of it, which makes it nice and different.
We are coming to the end of our time. John, John, I assume that for folks on the buy side that want to leverage this, I mean, I believe it's already live. It's live, correct?
Yeah.
Right. For folks on the buy side who are not partnering with Dotdash Meredith on this yet, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you folks and make it happen for them?
So hopefully anybody we're working with already has a rep and a contact and all the rest of it. But honestly, we're happy to talk about this at the strategic level as well. Like, executing against this is fairly straightforward. But I'd say there's a deeper challenge that we see that honestly we'd love to work with the IAB on this. We want to really see fixed in the industry, which is the industry is still fully hooked on cookies. Right. And I hadn't realized how much until after we did it all of the replatforming last year and got onto one tech stack. And we see about 300 million ad impressions a day. And we took a sample of that data to see how the market was buying our inventory, right? Less of an experiment in us, more of an experiment of what can we understand about the industry. And we knew that iOS was going to have weak demand and Android was going to be better, right? iOS inventory goes for about 25 cents on the dollar versus Android inventory, which is wild to me. But even within Android, the market concentration is extreme. So to give you an example, we have a bunch of client-side integrations, 6 or 7. 100% of our client-side SSPs bid on 10% of our users. That is an extraordinary level of market concentration.
Wow.
And 30% of the inventory isn't bid on by any one of those client-side partners. Other people in the marketplaces will bid on there, and we get but it's a lower rate when it all finally clears. If you're reading about how to get a mortgage, I don't think that 10% is more valuable than the rest of the set. But currently, the industry is being forced to pay 500% more for that matchable 10%. And that tells me that the marketplace doesn't have a differentiated buying strategy. That's a match table that everyone has. Everyone can match that 10%. And because everyone can match that 10%, there's an extremely high price being required of buyers to buy that audience. The value is there across the 100%, but the degree of market concentration is forcing up prices for buyers, forcing down the overall value to publishers, right? Because so much of this market is just being left fallow. And if it doesn't work for buyers and it doesn't work for publishers, then the market's broken.
Yeah.
But isn't that because, don't you think, so we could blame the AI and machine learning for this, right? But I think there's a fundamental challenge when marketers need outcomes. And because of those data signal laws, you can't tie it to outcomes, because especially on the iOS device. So unless users are opted into ATT, then the algorithms are the platforms are delivering to what the marketers want to see, which I think, to your point, is right. Maybe that's not always the right decision.
I think this goes back to, I think, one of the earlier points of it's as much about process and I think the way the business has been set up, and less about an actual fundamental challenge. There are so many measures of outcomes that don't require a cookie. Right? If you're doing a sales study in store, there's no cookie involved in that, right? Brand lift study is the same, right? There's lots and lots of outcomes and lots of advertisers and people on the brand side. You actually don't fundamentally need some online transaction to be tracked all the way through. But we behave as if that is the only unit of work, right? If we treat this, so we're never going to live in a world with no identity or no cookies. It's going to get smaller. It's never going to go away. There will always be a subset of like logged in users or hash IDs or all of that. If we treat that diminishing signal as the addressable market, we are going to break this marketplace, right? Because it's all, we can already see how broken it is, and half of the market still has cookies on. If we treat that signal as your panel to base your measurement on and use it to underpin a spend across the entire market, we already have all the science, all the math, all the tools to do this. If this was a linear business and we said you can exactly measure 5 to 10% of your buy, you'd be running around the building, setting off fireworks and holding a parade. Because we're in digital media, we're saying, oh my God, I cannot measure 90% of my audience. Like, come on, we solved this decades ago. This is not actually an unsolved problem. But we just have to make that mental shift as an industry and adopt things like the privacy sandbox tools and the new ID solutions and all the pieces that we have to work with. And we have to get comfortable with a world that looks like that. If we make that paradigm shift, this is all completely solvable. And the other piece is, if we make that paradigm shift now, we have a year where we can side by side cookieless targeting and measurement with cookie targeting and measurement with ID-based targeting measurement. We have a very, very good experimental landscape to work with right now, because we've got a natural experiment. Half the internet doesn't have cookies and half the internet does. We can do a lot of tests and work really thoroughly this year and get very comfortable. If we wait until the cookies go away from Chrome, we are going to be trying to fix this retroactively with no signal. And that's a very bad place to be. So our position, and this I would say, the question was, how do you work with Dotdash Meredith? Come to us to fix that problem, right? We want to work with partners, with the IAB, with Google. We're talking to everybody at this point. But we actually want to use this enormous publisher we've got, with the amount of data that's in the world right now, with that perspective of let's work together and do some big scaled tests side by side. And let's prove cookie targeting still works right now, but there's a cookieless world that actually performs better, is more reliable, has better outcomes. And this isn't, don't do cookie targeting, only do cookieless targeting, only do decipher targeting. It's do both, right? Do both whilst we can, get super comfortable with this. And then whatever Google does in the second half of next year is fine, because we've got a stable baseline that doesn't rely on them. And that's a much better world to live in the direction we're going, than waiting for the sky to fall after we told the sky is going to fall and then being surprised the sky fell, right? That's not a great world.
John, you give us a lot of words of wisdom, a lot of hope. I'm going to take into the weekend that you said, I think you put an if in front of the statement, but this is all solvable. So we're all going to run with that. I want to thank you for being here today. John Roberts, Chief Innovation Officer from Dotdash Meredith, and of course, my colleague at the IAB, Angelina Ng, Vice President at the Measurement, Addressability, and Data Center. And for those of you on the line and listening and viewing today, thank you for coming, and we will see you soon in the near future with another episode. Thank you.